Welcome everyone to tonight's asset protection webinar. We are delighted to have Randy Skeen. Randy has been a friend of mine for almost 20 years. When our company was when we were running the largest seminar company in the nation, Randy was our litigating attorney. A lot of people over the years on the hotline have asked, okay, so if you prepare the documents and you prepare my trust and my limited partnerships and LLCs, will you also defend me in case they get in trouble? And my answer has always been no, nor do you ever want us to. You never want to take the skill set of a good litigation attorney and compare it in any way with the skill set of a really good real estate attorney or a really good, I don't know, whatever type of estate planning attorney. The skill sets for a litigating attorney is so very, very different. And Randy is always the guy that we've turned to when we need just a street fighting mad dog from hell attorney. Sorry, Randy, but that understands litigation and can slam the defendant if need to up against the wall, do a deposition. That the skill set is so very, very different. And Randy has done, well, I'll give you his introduction a little bit later, but he's practiced law for over 40 years. He's defended people or seen over two or 3,000 cases, taken 600 to trial. Yeah. So to judgment in trial, it's a whole different skill set. And we've asked him to come in and talk specifically about divorce and some of the games that people play and how to win at this process. So before we get started though, I wanted to, if you're brand new to this, we wanted to let you know that this is a huge seminar series that we've been doing for 10 years. In March, we had Dr. William Danko, Richard the Millionaire, the author of The Millionaire Next Door, brilliant. Mike Koval on investing in the stock market. I don't know anybody that's clearer on what's happening in the market. We've had Toby Mathis, Steve Ruff talk about cost segregation and how that relates to the CARES Act, how real estate investors can benefit from the CARES Act. And we've had some of the most brilliant people, Scott Estel, the former senior trial attorney from the IRS, talking tax reduction. Aaron Adams, who's flipped almost 10,000 houses in his career in the last 20 years. We're delighted to have Randy on. But this is a big part of what we do. Webinars are always recorded, so this will be recorded and be available on our website over the next 30 days. I also need to, for all of our students, if you've registered for our Orlando event in September, we have now changed that to a live stream event so that we can reach more people, but also right now with coronavirus and not a lot of people are wanting to travel to Orlando. And so, and sit in a ballroom with a couple hundred people. So Vegas, though, we are still planning on having live. And so we'll see as we get a little bit closer, but we're planning on a live event, and Vegas appears to still be open at this point. That's where we're bringing in some of the best attorneys in the nation to teach asset protection. The best stock market people, the best real estate people, the best everything but litigating attorneys.
Well, I know, but you're missing the best. Litigators are the best.
I guess so. If you'd like a sample, if you haven't attended one of our summits, especially for the live stream, that the sample agendas are available on our website. And before we talk any discussion on legal or tax, there's always a disclaimer, and that is we can teach general principles. Randy is licensed in California, Utah, and Idaho. These concepts are general in nature and may not relate to you. They may not relate to your situation in your particular state, but we're going to be very accurate in what we teach. Just that this is where you always engage a professional before you take what's in theory and apply it to your situation. Is that good enough disclaimer?
That's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, okay, there we go. All right. So with that, let me introduce Randy a little bit different in a court case, especially in a divorce. The goal of the judge is equitable distribution, fairness, but our system is not a perfect system. And unfortunately, it often favors the person who has the best documents. It favors the person who's the most loud, the most aggressive, who has the most money, who has the best attorney, who's the best liar, frankly, who's willing to wait for money, and who can, just kind of freeze out the other person. Kids get used as pawns in the game. It's about a lot of things, but it's not always about fairness. And Randy has. I sat down to lunch with him a couple weeks ago. So many stories that he could tell about this, and so we'll try to be brief and still get to the point. But what a wealth of information Randy has. A lot of you have wondered why you haven't won at the divorce game. Attorneys aren't all created equally. There are times when you want a really nice guy that you want to talk to, but then there's times when you really do want to lawsuits and divorce. Divorce is a form of a lawsuit, obviously. When you're defending yourself, this is not a game. And a lot of people go into this and they just look for the nicest person. And this is not how to do divorce. Randy will give some really good examples but you got to get it out of your head that life is going to be fair, that the court is going to be fair. It's not going to be fair. You need the meanest, maddest person in your corner when you're facing a lawsuit. This is why we brought Randy in. Again, he's practiced law for over 40 years. He's licensed in Utah, California, and Idaho. 600 cases, tried to verdict. That's impressive. If you've been around the court system that long, you know how to file motions, you know how to delay, you know how to speed things up. He's admitted before the U.S. Supreme Court, as well as the 9th, 10th Circuit Courts of Appeal, Supreme Courts in 3 different states. Randy's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, in multiple magazines and news shows. We are so delighted to have Randy. I appreciate him. I appreciate his friendship. I appreciate him bailing our company out of so many times. Randy, we're delighted to have you. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks so much, Don. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here. Let me start out by saying I've spent the better part of 40 years in the court system. As Don said, I've tried many cases to verdict, thousands and thousands of motions. I've done hundreds of divorces. I've done everything from first-degree capital murder cases to divorces, fraud cases, everything in between. And so we like to think of ourselves, trial lawyers, litigators, because that's really what we are, as meat eaters. And I like to think that I'm kind of a meat eater, but I'm a street mutt too. I didn't go to Harvard, and sadly, I think I'm much the better for it. But let's start out with just a couple of things. I'm going to give you some important statistics, but let me reiterate what Don said. If you're looking for fairness, the F word, you're not going to find it at the court very often. Judges, by law and by practice, try to be fair. It's called equity. But in every case, one party thinks the judge was really, really fair, and the other one thinks, how could a judge be so unfair? And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. Now, first of all, let me give you some good news and bad news about divorces. The good news is, if you're going through a divorce, you're probably going to survive it, unless the ex or the estranged spouse kills you, and I've had that happen. The bad news is your finances aren't going to survive it likely. there's no way you're going to wind up with two households enjoying the same income and the same lifestyle that one household did with one or two incomes. Now, what I found really interesting are these statistics that we've got up on the board. And frankly, when we researched it, I thought these were a little lower. I'd always thought that divorces for first marriages were somewhere around 50%, and they were about 20 years ago. But in the last about 20 years, first marriages have gone down to 42%. Second marriages have a 60% chance of failure. Third marriages, 73% chance of failure. And if there's anybody that's willing to take those odds, you probably ought to go see a psychiatrist. But the heart does what it does, and love does what it does. And I haven't even put up the statistics for fourth and fifth marriages because they're just astronomical. The average party in a divorce is 30 years old. And I found this in my practice, particularly within 3 years, generally one or both of the divorced people have remarried. And statistically, there's 100 divorces per hour in our country. The countries with the highest divorce rate, I always thought it was the US, but it's not. We're only 6th. So the top is Russia, Belarus, Gibraltar, and then we're a little bit farther down the road. Divorce statistics by states, the highest, didn't surprise me, Nevada was high. So I was a little surprised that Idaho was that high, although I've done a number of divorces up in Idaho. And the lowest states for you that have tuned in from Iowa, Illinois, Massachusetts, North Dakota, and Pennsylvania, the odds are pretty good you're going to be staying married. Now, the occupations with the highest divorce rates. Now, this I found really interesting, and you should too if you're looking for a second. Well, I guess a first mate. The highest divorce rates, gaming and casino managers, bartenders, flight attendants, casino workers, massage therapists, telephone operators, telemarketers, dancers, dispatchers, and ambulance drivers. I don't know why. I've probably done a divorce for most of these folks. Now, if you're looking for somebody with the lowest rates, you got to find yourself an actuary. And I don't know if there's any out there. I thought actuaries are pretty boring. I did one divorce for an actuary.
Did you?
He about bored me to death. Yeah, but I don't know. And then scientists, I found clergymen, almost 20%. I thought that was relatively high in my experience. And then physical therapists, optometrists, and right down near the end are physicians and surgeons. I mean, they're in the lower 10. And I've done a lot of divorces for physicians and surgeons.
Hey, sorry to interrupt you guys. Can you guys hear me okay? Just do a quick sound check. We have a lot of people saying they can't hear okay. If you're online, can you just let us know you're hearing okay? We've got several people piping in saying they can't hear. I can hear you fine. No, I can hear you just fine. So I'm good on this end, but want to make sure. Okay, everybody else says they can hear fine. Just doing a double check.
I can move the mic a little closer. Does that help?
Yeah, that's coming in clear. All right, just making sure. Super. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, when do you want to get divorced? The right answer to that question is never. But if you look statistically at when people get divorced, and my practice has tracked this as well, it's pretty common. You think everybody would have a nice Christmas and want to get divorced in December, particularly for tax benefits or not. But statistically, most of the divorces occur in February, March, and September and August.
This is when they actually file for divorce.
This is when they file. And I know in my experience, the holidays drive a lot of people nuts. And I think that's why you're getting a lot of them in February and March.
I think it's interesting to look at that right after summer vacation is when they're filing for divorce.
You know, we haven't put up a graph for coronavirus, but I can tell you out here, I think divorce filings have about doubled in the last 3 months. Domestic violence cases have tripled.
Wow.
So I think we're all going crazy a little bit with this stuff. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention at the first, thank you for tuning in to us tonight and listening to me. I know you had a lot of other things you could be doing, but actually you don't because we're all locked down. So this is a good place to be.
Good.
And I thank you for that. All right, average length of a first marriage that ends in divorce is 8 years. Remember, there was a movie called The 7-Year Itch, and that was what it was about. 75% of men who married between 1955 and 1959 stayed married for at least 20 years. Yet, between 1975 and 1979, only 58% of men stayed married for at least 20 years.
Wow.
So statistically, things are changing. I think it's easier to get divorced now than it was. I know when I grew up in mid to late 50s and 60s, there was a stigma attached to divorce, which I don't think there is anymore, and I think that's good. We shouldn't sentence people to life sentences with each other if they don't want to be together. This was interesting as well. Factors tending to lower divorce rates. Having a baby within a year after marriage, and that surprised me as well, but I think children have a way of bringing parents together. And I think those of you who are parents know that's likely true. Waiting until you're at least 23 before the first marriage, that's really important too, because you got a little bit better judgment than you do when you're 18 and 19. Interesting also is that you're finding a lot of the millennials now are marrying much later in life, in their 30s, and staying in mom's basement. Hopefully you don't have that. It's time to kick them out and get on with life. I have a partner, one of my law partners, that when he gave his first wife, emphasis on first wife, a ring, the wedding ring, she complained that the stone wasn't big enough. And the first thing the other partners and myself did was to tell him, try to talk him down and say, man, this isn't going to work. And lo and behold, about 10 years later, they were divorced. And so I think you can read a lot into that.
Interesting statistic, isn't it?
It really is. And having seen it up close with a partner and a very, very close friend, it's true. Interestingly enough, if you're born and raised in a strong religious community, doesn't matter what religion, you're likely to stay married longer and stay married permanently. Another statistic we find is that children who come from broken homes are 50% more likely themselves to get divorced. And the studies seem to indicate that. And I don't know necessarily why that is, but it is. We find a lower divorce rate with people who have higher education levels, bachelor's, master's, PhDs. We also find less divorce among strong family networks, i.e., you're close with your parents, you're close with your grandparents, your uncles, your aunts, and your siblings. And then, again, this surprised me a little bit, but a higher income level seems to be something that keeps you in a marriage. And I think part of it is you get to a certain age in life and have a certain amount of income and you don't want to give up half of it. And I get it. Sometimes it's not worth the price of getting out. I had another friend that has stayed married in a horrible marriage just because of that. And then finally, military service seems to help. That surprises me a little too. I'm a veteran, but I've stayed married for 44 years, and maybe that helps as well. Now, when you go into a divorce, the issues are pretty simple. I mean, it's not like a lot of cases where you go into this thing blindly and you can't pin down what's going to happen. Basically, they're as follows. The primary ones, the ones we've highlighted if children are involved, are child custody, child support, and parent time or visitation issues. And right out of the gate, there are more cases that go to trial over these issues than any other. And it's fairly obvious. In child custody, it's generally a 100-0 deal. One side's got to win and the other side's got to lose. And sadly, the children are mainly the losers in a situation like this. We have seen in the past few years more of a tendency for courts to look at what we call joint physical custody, which isn't the strictly every other weekend. And I'm seeing a lot of courts and judges that really do favor a 50-50 parent time with the children, where a week with mom, a week with dad, something like that. But I've always said if the parents can get along that well for the sake of the kids, I don't know why in the world they're getting divorced. Division of assets and liabilities. Courts and laws in most states will call for what's called an equitable division, a fair division. But where that breaks down generally is a 50-50 breakdown. And so going into one of these things, if you're going to be smart about it, you're going to say, look, I'm going to lose 50%. And if I can claw back something better, i.e. 51%, 52%, I'm ahead of the game. Retirement accounts, those are always a big deal. And again, at least in the state of Utah and California states, we have pretty good law that divides that equally, retirements. But I'll tell you where wild cards come in. If you have military retirement, and most people aren't aware, unless you get divorced, that one partner's Social Security benefits can be given to the other partner, the other spouse. So that's a big deal. Home ownership, there's always an issue over who gets it, how much equity's in it, when do I get my equity, do I really want it? And then finally, alimony monster or spousal support, always hotly litigated.
Now, Randy, over the years, I've had so many men call me up and say, okay, my wife never made the house payment. She stayed home with kids, but this is my retirement account, and they can't conceive why those assets would be split.
Right.
And yet the judge is going to split the assets.
That is probably the most sure thing in divorce, in family law, that it is going to get split, and it's likely going to be 50-50. And I tend to agree with the thought process behind it. My wife was a stay-at-home mom. She took care of those kids, and I got to tell you, I couldn't do it. I'm not hardwired that way, and I'll tell you, she worked harder than I ever did. The office. I'd much rather be in court trying a divorce case or a murder case or something else than to be home with the little angels.
And the court will look at it as though it was a partnership.
That's exactly what a court does. It treats it as a 50-50 partnership. And just because mom may have stayed home, or dad, we get house husbands, stayed home and changed diapers and washed clothes, cooked meals, they're going to get half. And now that's always subject to negotiation. I mean, I've traded equity in homes for retirement fairly frequently. Lots of women get married to the home. Secondarily, they marry the husband and then they marry the home. But they would rather have the sureness, the surety of equity in a home, and they'll trade a chunk or a part or all of their alimony or their retirement account for that home. And that's something that you really have to analyze and go through. It's something that whatever you're going to spend on your lawyer, that's probably the best money you're ever going to spend.
Okay.
How to protect myself. Okay, there is not a silver bullet that's going to protect your assets. I think number one, you've got to get the mindset of 50-50. But negotiation is always better than litigation. And I'll tell you why. Now, this is to my detriment and my fellow lawyers' detriment, but you can spend your money better. You can retain your money, which is better for you than to spend it on guys like me. So most courts will require you to go to mediation, but I think the best thing you can do if you're going to get divorced, sit down with a lawyer, sit down with a CPA, figure out where things are going. And sometimes both spouses do that. I'm not a great fan of hiring one lawyer, one CPA, but if you can do it in a cooperative way and you know you're going to settle the case, why pay two lawyers? It's really important to look at asset protection techniques. You folks that are familiar with the Protect Wealth Academy, you have actually world-class folks teaching this stuff. And I just submit that you ought to listen to them. It's the best information you can get. And these guys honestly are head and shoulders above me in this stuff. I can try cases forever, and I do a pretty darn good job of it. But with the asset protection stuff, you need the best you can probably find. Never hide assets. Now, years ago, about 15 years ago, I had a guy that was a part-time judge in a municipality. And he came to me and he said, look, I'm not a trial lawyer. I need somebody to try cases and to litigate these cases. And if you'll do them with me, partner up, we'll just split the fee, according to the work that was done. And I said, well, that's great. And the practice was primarily, there were a few divorces, a lot of personal injury cases, medical malpractice cases, things like that. And so he was getting divorced. He's one of these guys, I never thought in the world he'd ever get divorced. I mean, straight arrow. Like I said, he was a judge, really good guy. So I knew he was getting divorced, and one day I get a subpoena dropped on me. And they want to know information about what money I had given to him in connection with our agreement in these cases. So I went back and I had my paralegal go through the check registry, and I noticed that there were a number of checks I'd written to him that had not been cashed. And it was fairly significant monies. I think it was between $70,000 and $80,000. Well, long and short of it, I had to testify that I'd given him this money. I showed the checks, and lo and behold, what he'd done is he tried to hide them in his top desk drawer. At the end of the day, he lost his license to practice law. He had to resign as a judge, and he went to jail for 90 days. And he gave up half of that $80,000. It is not worth it. I don't care what it costs. I don't care how smart you think you are. There's always somebody smarter than you that'll be able to find out, and it'll come to light. And judges, frankly, will just kill you in divorces. When we talk about equity and judge going to be fair, forget the 50-50, it's out the window. The one that lies, the one that tries to cheat, the one that tries to conceal assets is going to get hammered. Most courts now, particularly Utah, California, and Idaho, have an automatic injunction once a lawsuit, a divorce suit is filed, a petition is filed. There's an automatic injunction that legally prohibits anybody from transferring, hiding, secreting, or encumbering assets. Don't take it. It's not worth it.
So Julie's asking why they went to jail.
Contempt. Lied to the court. When he filled out his financial declaration under oath that he signed, he didn't identify the $80,000 sitting in his top drawer.
Now, can I insert something?
Please.
We talk a lot in asset protection about maybe the benefits of Wyoming, Nevada, Delaware. You can use a nominee office. Your name's not on those assets. But in a divorce court where you're under oath that these are the assets that I have, that's a whole different thing than hiding from a plaintiff or siloing assets over here. When you start dividing, hiding assets from a spouse.
Well, I just don't think you do it. A spouse probably, first of all, knows at least enough about what your business is to rat you out. But secondly, there are criminal penalties with at least a 4-year statute of limitations. And generally, I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it's worth it. I think you be upfront, you be honest, you take your medicine and you move on. Believe me, it's a whole lot easier to move on and build assets than to conceal them and look over your shoulder for the next 4+ years. And I'll tell you this, even though there's a 4-year criminal statute, I think if I discovered that an opposing party had hidden assets, I'd immediately go back to the court and try to set aside the whole divorce and hold them in contempt.
Cool.
Don't do it.
All right, Randy, so that everyone on here knows, we plan to go for another maybe 20, maybe 30 minutes.
Okay.
And then we're going to open this up to questions. So we got to get to solutions.
Okay, I'm going to rush ahead then a little bit. Can I do it myself? One thing you may find is that courts are doing a lot of what they call litigant-friendly stuff. You can go online and get all the papers and do it yourself. Can I do it? Honest Abe said, the man who represents himself has a fool for a client. That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, how do I find a good divorce lawyer? Well, when I first started practicing law, it was illegal to advertise. Now, I took just a few minutes last week and went on the internet and looked at the lawyers locally here that were advertising. And I'll tell you, the first 10 I'd never heard of. And as I looked closer and got in, I found out that most of them had less than 10 years experience, but they knew how to advertise. They knew how to do the search engine optimization. They had somebody that would throw money at it. And, you know, when you do, you're looking for a lawyer online and you go to Google, it's a pay-per-click thing. So if you put divorce attorney and you click on somebody, it charges that lawyer anywhere from $25 to $300.
So what you're saying is, and Randy, I've looked at your website and it
sucks.
and it's pitiful, but yeah,
I'm old school.
When I'm looking for a street fighting dog, I'm looking for somebody with some scars on his face who's maybe not the best marketer, but knows his way around the court, yeah, and will defend me and represent my case. I don't care how good he looks on the billboard outside, right, or on the freeway, or how good his website is, or it has absolutely no correlation to how good the attorney is.
That's exactly right.
Great point.
100% of my work, this is why I have such a lousy website, 100% of my work is referral.
Well, there you go.
For 40 years, I've never really advertised. I've never had big yellow page ads when we used to have telephones. You remember those telephones?
Well, Randy, I can't tell you how many people I've sent to you over the years.
You have.
Because you've taken good care of us.
A good source. Okay, secondly, you're going to pay for what you get. I had an old partner that used to say, if you want a Volkswagen, you're going to pay for a Volkswagen. If you want a Mercedes, you're going to pay for a Mercedes. You are going to pay for what you get. If you want somebody like me that's practiced 40 years and like Don says, got the scars to show, you're going to pay me for that. And I'm not cheap. And I'm going to cost a lot more than an internet guy that with 10 years.
But in the end, it might be cheaper.
It is cheaper because I know what I'm doing. I've been down the road. I don't think there are very few issues I haven't seen in 40 years. And so I don't have to research and reinvent the wheel.
Good.
I would recommend you look for somebody with at least 15 to 20 years of experience, because they do have the scars Don's reference, and usually they'll kind of know how things work. This is really important. Get a lawyer that you can be honest with. I fired a client last week because she repeatedly lied to me, and then she was outraged when I discovered the lies. I mean, if you can't be honest with your lawyer, you're killing yourself and you're killing your case. But it's got to be somebody that you feel comfortable with, somebody that you can tell where the bodies are buried. And understand there's an attorney-client privilege. We're not going to tattle on you, but get somebody you're comfortable with. This, I think, is probably the most important thing. Interview at least 3 lawyers. Talk to people who've been through divorces have them refer you to somebody. Every lawyer I know is going to give you at least an hour of free time. I'll give you an hour of free time if you call me, and interview, and then get an idea. Ask them, well, I think we're going to get that. Here's the questions. What experience do you have in family law? How many cases have you really tried? Now understand, only probably in my experience, 3 to 5% of family law cases actually go to trial. But you need somebody that's been there. I mean, settling and mediation is great, but that's not like standing in front of a judge. Check for conflicts of interest. We as lawyers do that all the time, but you need to double check and make sure that the lawyer didn't represent your spouse's Aunt Tilly in a divorce 5 years ago. This is really important. There are guys on the radio, there are guys on TV. We're great lawyers. We represent only women. We represent only men. We're the best, blah, blah, blah. You need to know if you're going to be working with a lawyer or a paralegal. And a lot of these big advertisers, I've dealt with them, and they're younger lawyers or paralegals. Again, get a lawyer that has experience and you can deal with. A good question. What's your experience with local judges and commissioners? If they don't know who the judges are and they don't know what a commissioner does, thank them for their time and move on. But every judge has his or her own idiosyncrasies. I know what they're looking for, and I know what they want to hear, and I know what they don't want to hear. And then finally, ask how much do you charge, and what do you charge? You're going to get a fee agreement that's going to spell that out. I, years ago, back in the 80s, picked up as a client, it was the largest independent motion picture production company in the world. And they were looking for new counsel because every time they got a bill from the great big silk stocking firms, it had all these hidden costs. They were charging for toll calls and faxes and all this time, just junk charges.
Copies.
Phone calls. I mean, I only bill for my time. I don't bill for my paralegal, although most people do now. They bill paralegal and secretarial time. To me, it's all included. I charge a boatload for my hourly rate, and that's included. Okay, prenuptial agreements. Did you have something, Don? I'm sorry.
Nope.
Okay.
I'm good.
Prenups. I want to go over this in a little bit of detail, but I'm gonna try to cut it a little short. Everybody's heard of a prenup, and basically, what is a prenup? It's nothing more than a contract. It requires the same. It has the same requirements as any written contract, and those are things like there must be consideration. Both parties got to agree to it. Now, what are the benefits of a prenup? Well, number one, the biggest benefit is you can protect the assets that you bring into your marriage, and you can control what happens with those assets in the event of a divorce. You're not going to have some guy in a black dress deciding where your properties that you acquired before the marriage but have increased in value during the marriage are going. I always recommend on a second marriage a prenuptial agreement. Now, what are the important the terms of a prenup? And let's see,
Let's go back one.
Want to go back one?
Yep.
Okay, important terms. Okay, number one, you want a prenuptial agreement that's bulletproof. I've had to do one, and it's gone through the fires of court hell and has been upheld, and it's not a 1 or 2 page document. I think it's about 17 or 20 pages. But the most important thing is there's got to be a full disclosure of all assets on both sides. There can't be any fraud or duress. It's got to be fair. It's got to be fair. Judges, by and large, don't like prenuptial agreements, in my experience. And if you can give them a reason to kick one out, they'll do so. And then finally, maybe the most important thing, both sides should have a lawyer review it and sign off on it. Now, what seems to be the most important thing in my experience has been fairness. And I'm just going to tell another war story if I could. I had a case up in Idaho about 4 years ago in which it was a second marriage for both parties. They were both widowers. The husband was, I think, 72 when they got married. The wife was about 66, 67. He was a wealthy rancher and had a lot of property, had a really good cattle business. And so he also had 5 greedy children. And so what they did to protect their interest, did not really caring that much for their dad, in my opinion. 2 hours before they got married, they drugged my client, and you can tell I had the wife. Her name was, we'll call her Mary, and Don was the, not this Don, but Don was the husband. But they came and picked her up, she and Don, took them to their lawyer's office. The lawyer presented them with this prenuptial agreement and then basically said, well, let's sign it so we can go get you married by noon. And she didn't really read it. She trusted that she'd be with Don the rest of her natural life. She signed it, never consulted a lawyer, and away they went. Well, 17 years later, and during the 17-year period, they worked hand in hand on his business, this cattle business. The judge, interestingly, knew a fair amount about the cattle business, and it was not unusual that they worked 14, 16-hour days together. And as Dawn got older and couldn't see, she would drive the truck around. She would inspect the cattle. She would sign all the documents for them. I mean, it even got to the point where she would sign the checks, his own checks, as directed by him, because he couldn't see well enough to do it. Well, lo and behold, he's 92, and the kids have decided that Mary is stealing from his, Don's money, i.e. their estate. And they took Don into a lawyer. He filed a petition for divorce and proffered this prenuptial agreement, which basically the terms were terribly onerous. Basically, it gave her nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. Everything. He got to keep everything, and everything that had increased during this 17 years. So I had to litigate that. We had a trial on that issue. And, if you pick up, hint, hint, no lawyer, presented 2 hours in advance, not fair, hadn't read it. I mean, there were abundance of reasons for the judge to kick it out, and he did kick it out. And one point that I thought was really sad, and we all have kids, but please don't allow them to manipulate us in our old age. When we took Don's deposition, the very first question his lawyer asked him was, Don, why do you want to get divorced? And Don's answer, truthfully, was, I don't. And so at the end of the day, that prenuptial agreement, there was an exchange of probably $4 to $5 million in assets. And sadly, each side spent over $200,000 in attorney's fees. So if you're going to do a prenup, do it the right way, get the terms, and make sure it's fair and that both parties agree. Now, postnuptial agreements, that's nothing more than an agreement that the spouses enter into after they're married. I had a gentleman call me 2 weeks ago, and he said, I want a postnuptial. And I said, well, how come? And he said, well, we sold our home and we want to buy this new house because it's such a good deal, but we think we might get divorced in a year. And I thought, well, okay, I advised against it. And I said, I guess if you really want to do it, come on in, we'll do it. I didn't hear back from them, so I guess maybe they thought better of it. But again, the terms have to be the same. It has to be agreed upon. It's got to be fair. Probably have each side have lawyers, but I mean, if the road to divorce is imminent, just do it. Before I do common law marriage, let me tell you just a couple of quick things, how you know your marriage is probably done. A couple of things I've noticed over the years, not to generalize too much, but that I find men think less about, I think harder about getting divorced than women do. And I think it's that men from Mars thing where we process things, I think, differently from women. I use another old law partner of mine that he'd come in about every 6 months and say, damn it, file the divorce. I hate her. I can't do it. He came in one day, I remember, and he looked like the Target dog. He had a big black eye. And I said, what happened to you? She hit me with a shoe. All right, we're getting divorced. So I sit down for, I don't know how many time, prepared the petition. 3 days later, never mind, it's okay. But another thing I have noticed is that when women have had a belly full of us, they've had a belly full and they're pretty done. And I don't know why that is, but it's just something I've noticed. Secondly, if you're like a client of mine who got mad at her estranged husband and snuck in his house in the middle of the night and duct taped his breathing machine, what do they call those things?
CPAP.
CPAP.
Yeah.
Duct taped it to his face and then sprayed him in the eyes with pepper spray. I think that marriage is probably done. One other thing I love, I really like Winston Churchill, but he had a love-hate relationship with a woman named Lady Astor, which my wife tells me is a pretty famous lady. She was in the House of Commons with him, and they used to fight tooth and nail over things. But during one fight, she said they were actually guests at the Duke of Marlborough over a weekend, and they got in apparently a ferocious argument in which Lady Astor said, Winston, if I were your wife, I would put poison in your coffee. And Churchill answered, Nancy, if I were your husband, I would drink it. So if you have that type of relationship, I think it's done. Get a lawyer.
All right.
Okay.
So we got about 10 more minutes.
All right, we'll go these really quickly. There are a number of states, beware of common law marriages. There are a number of them. Utah is one that still acknowledges common law marriages. Don't believe that if you're just living with somebody, that may protect you from that. There are certain legal requirements. I've got them on here. You can come back and review them later. But if you're just going to live with somebody, and it's a lot more common now than it was, 30, 40 years ago, you might consider a prenuptial agreement just to protect yourself.
So we're not married. I'm living with somebody, and we live together for 10 years, and then I go my way. She may very well have access to those assets.
She very well may. I mean, I had a case years ago where they'd lived together forever, and we were able to check the box every single one of these. They were legally capable. And when I say legally capable, yeah, you can't be a bigamous marriage, but they lived together a long time. And within 1 year of breaking up, she came to me, I filed the petition, and our evidence was huge. The husband had given her a wedding ring. He'd referred to her frequently as his wife. She brought me a whole envelope full of birthday cards to my loving wife from my loving husband.
And she got half the
estate, and it was a major estate. Again, it was well into 7 figures.
Even though they weren't married. That's interesting.
Yep. So careful. We'll say about that. Okay. We have what's called community property states, and 2 of the states I practice, Idaho and California, are community property states. The the rest of them you see in white are what we call common law states. The major difference in a community property state versus a common law state is when the separation of assets occurs. In a community property state, for example, California, the date you're married is the date that community property starts. Everything you have before that date is sole and separate property and remains such unless you give it, you transfer it by a writing, or you commingle it. Be very careful, commingling inherited property. And then in community property states, the day you cut things off is the date of separation. Not so in common law states, it's the date you actually get divorced, which is the date of trial. Now, two little interesting stories. There was a fairly well-known, famous, he wasn't an actor, but he was in the movie business back in California when I practiced there. And he and his wife got separated, and they were separated for a good year or two, as I recall. And during that time, he'd signed some really big contracts, made just a huge amount of money. Well, after that time, I don't know if the wife lured him back. He claimed she did. He went back, took a little suitcase full of clothes, stayed there 2 weeks, walked out again. This isn't going to work. The court found that reconciliation was valid, and he wound up losing 1/2 huge assets. Now, I know this parenthetically because I was set in court during the case. I didn't represent either party in it. So be a little careful of that. Another thing about commingling of property, I represented a guy in 3 divorces that had to buy his house back 3 times because he refinanced it and put the new wife's name on the deed and on the mortgage because she was strong financially. Be careful.
Wow.
You'll lose your equity. Okay, how do we reduce legal fees? We charge a lot of money. I do. I frequently tell clients I couldn't afford me. But first of all, educate yourself a little bit about the law. Understand just the things I've told you can save you some money. Settle as much of your case as you can. Interestingly enough, I've had a lot of cases settle a month before trial when the parties finally got together and said, this is crazy. We're spending our estate, we're spending our children's inheritance on this. So I say settle first, litigate second. I've had a judge I just loved that used to say, a bad settlement is frequently better than a good trial. Be honest with your lawyer. Just tell us the truth. Provide electronic documents. It's now a requirement. Don't go and delete emails and stuff. It can always be recovered. Go to mediation. I recommend you do it sooner than later. When people hire me for a divorce now, I try to do an early mediation, generally within about 60 days, to see if we can really settle it. Communicate with your lawyer by email. I charge a flat quarter hour for a phone call, whether I spend 2 minutes or 25 minutes. So save yourself some money. Gather your records and timelines yourself. Don't make me find them and go after them. Finally, we're not therapists. I'm bad at that stuff. You can ask my wife. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a kinder and gentler person. I'm a bulldog. And finally, let me tell you one thing about trials. I tell this to every client that walks through the door. In the state of Utah, the only legalized gambling we have is a trial.
You know, Randy, in our experience, when I was Vice President of Legal and Compliance, I would gather all the information and I would put together timelines and I would look for all the documents and I would come, as best I could, I put together some.
You did. When you met with me, you would bring banker's boxes and full of files and binders. And the money you saved the client by me not having to paw through and put stuff together. And frankly, you are the expert in it, not me.
Well, but you did what I couldn't do, and that was represent and file the petitions and everything. But you always had a summary sheet and a timeline. This happened on August 1st. This happened on, and so unemotional, step by step, here's the timeline of what happened. Whenever you can put that together for your attorney, you're going to save a boatload of money.
Undoubtedly. One other thing, if your lawyer emails you, answer immediately. I mean, I had a client, I had to file stuff today, and I'd been trying to get a hold of her for a week, and it was time sensitive, and I had to file stuff without her assistance with some things that really would have helped me. That's one thing Don would always do too. He'd return my phone call within an hour. All right, here's the records. I won't go over either one, but this is just, or everyone, you can look at this at your leisure, but these are just an idea of the important things you should have, and you should bring them when you meet with your lawyer the first time. Don't meet and then bring them back another time. Save yourself the money. Bring them at the very first meeting. One point, the third one down, video all the personal property. We fight over steak knives and we fight over couches. And if you've got video showing, no, there weren't 15 TVs in the house, there were 3, that's going to help you down the road as you fight over these things. But all of these documents at some time or another, you're going to have to produce them anyway. You might as well get it up front.
And are we looking for what, like 3 years of
3 years
statements?
I'd go 3 years of, well, what our courts require are a year of bank statements, 3 years of tax returns, 3 years of W-2s, 1 year of bank and credit card statements, everything having to do with property taxes, auto loan, any kind of loans, mortgage statements. One thing I put in here, you'll notice loan applications. I love getting those from the other parties because frankly, a lot of people lie on those and inflate their income. And I love it when they're saying, well, I can't pay alimony because I only make $3,000 a month. And then I go to the bank and I subpoena their loan app for buying a car, and it shows they make $7,000 a month.
Cool.
All right. Also, don't forget your trusts and wills. You know, get those done. Get these good guys with the academy here and get that stuff done. The worst thing a lawyer, I mean, it's kind of like the cobbler whose kids have no shoes. A lot of lawyers don't have wills, and I didn't probably the first 20 years of my practice. Okay, trust but verify. Look for these type of things, new accounts in brothers' names, brother-in-law's names,
Kids' names.
Recently, we found a bunch of stuff with Venmo and PayPal where we've had clients lie to us and have tried to hide, even from their lawyer, transactions they've done on Venmo and PayPal. And, you know, we're all sophisticated enough lawyers. We're going to subpoena those things anyway. Or ask
So they're
directly.
receiving money, but it doesn't show.
It doesn't show on their bank
But
statement.
it shows on an electronic
Absolutely.
Venmo. Ooh.
Oh, judges hate that. New business formations, keep your eyes on that. These are things I always ask for in discovery anyway. You want to get credit card statements. If you think you're going to get divorced, start copying the credit card statements. Just go online and go back as far as you can. Also look for unusual expenses. If you've got a husband that doesn't travel much, but you're seeing a lot of expensive hotel bills because he's got a girlfriend, take a look at those things. That stuff's there. And then I really like credit reports. Those, yeah, they show a lot of stuff that, and understand this isn't a gotcha game, but it sometimes turns out to be that way. And I'd rather be the one doing the gotcha rather than being the gotcha. Okay, tips for appearing in court, really, really quick. Understand this isn't your house. Show respect to the judge, court officers, and to your spouse. Don't think you're the smartest person in the courtroom, because I promise you, you're not. Settle as much as you can before going to court. No outbursts. Don't sit over and mouth "you're an ass" to your spouse. be stone-faced, be reasonable, come prepared. Don't bring kids, food, drinks, cell phone. Be honest. But I had one guy that had lied about it and wouldn't pay his child support. And I didn't want him to go to jail because he'd lose his job. But he was just so bad, the judge finally put him in jail for 30 days. So as the bailiff came and hooked him up, cuffed him and took him to the holding cell, he turned over, looked at the judge and said, "Well, thanks for doing justice, Judge." And the judge looked at him and said, "You want 30 more? So you're not in your house."
Talk to me about being stone-faced.
You know, the worst thing you can do, look at lawyers. We never react. A good lawyer will not react. And that's good because you don't want to be showing emotion. It's emotional, I get it. But the worst thing you can do is look over at your wife and then mouth, "You lying bitch," or something like that. Just sit there. The truth will come out. And the person that can be the most reasonable and cool and calm is going to come out better.
Those are really good suggestions.
Well, they're just tips that I've learned in 40 years. And honestly, you're a fool if you don't do this stuff. You'll get hammered. Okay, I think we're about done. I love that. If I said wasn't contesting, yeah. You'd be surprised how many people come in and hire me to do an uncontested divorce that winds up contested. Hey, I thought you had all the issues resolved. Well, we did, except for the house, the retirement, and the kids. Okay. We offer a free 30-minute consultation with one of our folks. Go to protectwealth.com/divorce. We're here to help. And I really do appreciate the opportunity of talking.
Now, you're not going to get an attorney that's been out of law school for 3 months.
We don't have any that are out of school. We only have 4 of us, and I'm the oldest with 40 years. The next one has 38 years, and the next one has 32 years, and the next one has 30 years. So I think we know what we're doing.
I think that's really good. So final thoughts.
Listen, if you have to get divorced, it's okay. But if you're just mad, counseling is a whole lot cheaper than alimony. If you are getting divorced, settle whatever you can. Oh, one I didn't put in here, happy wife, happy life. You know, full disclosure with your lawyer. Don't tell them where the bodies are buried. Likely it'll never go beyond you and the lawyer, but you know, if you've got warts, I need to see them. And then follow the golden rule. Treat your spouse, your soon-to-be ex-spouse, how you want to be treated, and it'll come back and pay, usually in dividends.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Randy, I appreciate this. So let's open this up to your questions. And let me kick out of here and see if I can get this to work. Okay. Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
Hey, Don, while you're looking those up, I did put that link is clickable in the chat screen. So if you do want to do that free 30-minute consult, you can actually click on that link in the chat screen, protectwealth.com/divorce.
Okay, now Randy, you're licensed in Utah, Idaho, and California.
That's correct.
But, and so are you only looking for people in those states, or will you do a consult with anyone?
I'll do a consult with anyone. Understand the caveat that I don't know Massachusetts law and nobody knows Louisiana law. It's so different and weird. We can probably help you with prenuptial agreements and things like that because we can research local rules and whatnot, but I think we can help with those.
And if not, you can refer them to attorneys almost anywhere, but.
Yep, and we'll stand behind them. We'll refer them to good lawyers.
Okay, good. Daria, I'm divorced but overpaid child support, but overpaying. Also seem to be on the rock. Where can I find a site that helps me figure out how much I owe? It's a good question.
Are you delinquent? Is it delinquent?
No, I don't think so.
Or overpaid or paying too much?
It seems to be paying too much.
Okay, most states have what's called uniform child support guidelines. What happened about 30 years ago, the federal government mandated states to collect child support, and every state has a recovery services in Utah, a district attorney's office that will collect child support. And well, this is why our country's so great, but it's also why we're broke. If the DA in California collects $100 in child support, the federal government will pay them an incentive of $6, even though the recipient will get the whole 100. So, but hand in glove with that, they mandated that each state has child support guidelines. They're very easy to access. You go online, put whatever state you are, Wyoming child support guidelines, it'll pop up, probably with a bunch of lawyers' advertisements, but you just punch in, generally it's gross income from both parties, how many children, the type of custody, and it'll spit out what the presumptive order is. That, and I say presumptive, but I've rarely, if ever, seen courts deviate from that.
Okay, that's good advice. How can I protect what I earn so it doesn't have to go to my ex just because she's decided she can work less and get more child support from me?
Well,
again, go back to the guidelines.
Yeah, the guidelines are always going to control, but the interesting thing about most of these guidelines, particularly in Utah and California, they're graduated. And so what that means is the more both parties make, the more the paying party will pay. And the reverse is the same. If you have a spouse, mom that, made $5,000 a month, but decided she wanted to only make $1,000 a month, you punch that in the guidelines, the amount will go down. But most courts will also consider imputing income. They don't like people dogging it. They don't like people not working so that they can get more alimony and child support. And you can impute, and I've done it many times. I've had it done to clients of mine. But judges will look at it fairly and say, hey, if you have a bachelor's degree and you have the ability to earn $5,000 a month, then how come you're earning minimum wage at the 7-Eleven?
I've seen that where a bank manager went down to be a teller so that he didn't have to pay as much in child support.
Yeah, and it's really short-sighted. I always tell clients on both sides, if you're going to pay child support, don't reduce your own income to save $100. Make what normally it is. It doesn't make up. I mean, if you're that angry, then I guess, but the math will never catch up.
Derry is asking how they can speak with you, and I think we've answered that.
Got it.
And lots of I can hear yous. I've been married for 4 years. We don't have any kids. My wife did not spend a single cent on anything. She was working for at least 2 years while we were married. Can she get access to my savings when we get divorced?
Well,
and he's living in India.
In India. Oh.
Good luck on that one.
Yeah, you know what? You better find a lawyer there. I could tell you in the States what it would be. First of all, if your savings were premarital and you didn't commingle them, yeah, you'd keep them. But if it was earned during the course of the marriage, I'm sorry, I think it's a marital asset and it'd be a 50-50.
I think that's fair. Okay, Lucy. So we changed the beneficiary of retirement accounts, the revocable living trust before a divorce. The ex-spouse still gets 50% depending on the state laws.
Okay, so if I understand.
So if we change the beneficiary of retirement
accounts. You change the beneficiary of the retirement account to whom?
Well, but if it's still an asset acquired,
it's still a marital asset. Yes,
regardless of who you change.
Yeah, I don't think it makes any difference. And that brings up another. That's really a good point because for years, younger years, I used to give bad advice. We would routinely in divorce decrees say the dad would have to have an insurance policy and keep it in effect in case he died so that it would make up for the child support that he wouldn't pay. And I would tell clients back then, I'm smarter now, well, what do you care? You're going to be dead. What do you care? They're not going to hold you in contempt. What do you care? Well, we have a law, and there are laws now, particularly in the state of Utah, where, and this happened to a client of mine. He got remarried. He changed the beneficiary to the new wife, and the court looked right through it and then split it 50-50. And the old wife got 50.
The death benefit, they split
The
it
death
50,
benefit,
50.
yeah. And you know the person.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes. Yeah.
So I think they will look past whatever you've got beneficiaries, unless you did a post-nuptial agreement in which you said, these are the beneficiaries and we're going into it with our eyes open, i.e. we want our kids to be the beneficiaries. Then you might get away with that. Yeah.
I could see it where husband changes the beneficiary. It used to be his wife for his life insurance policy.
Mhm.
Now he makes it the kids. And is this a marital asset? I would think that
It could be. It depends on what kind of policy. If it's a whole life or a blend that has a cash value, yeah, it probably would be a marital asset.
Sure. For your limitations after the JOD.
Okay, that's a general statute of limitations for felonies in many states. It's a 2-year misdemeanor in a lot of states, and federally it's 4 years unless there's another statute.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, you don't want to walk that line of fraud, and there's ways that they can extend statutes of limitations too.
And Christy, I'm really glad you're on tonight. Thank you for being here. Pierre, could I lose my assets in divorce if I acquired it before the marriage? I think you covered that.
Yeah, usually everything acquired premarital, as long as it is not commingled or gifted by a document, that is generally protected.
So I see that a lot where this rental property was, or this house was premarital, but the property taxes were paid and the mortgage were paid, with
Yeah.
marital assets. I'm sorry.
Yep, that's
Spouse,
commingled.
yeah.
I've had that exact issue. I'll bet I've had it a dozen times.
Yeah.
And what courts will generally do is they'll give you King's X part of the equity until marriage, but then they're going to divide the additional equity from the time of marriage to the time of divorce.
Good.
So be careful with that.
Needed a litigator for a divorce in Cleveland, Ohio? ?
I just did a criminal case out in Cleveland.
Did you?
Contact me and I'll contact, I had co-counsel out there that could probably find you somebody.
Okay.
And by the way, Cleveland's a really pretty city. I really like it.
Kendall?
Yeah, I'll just pipe in really quick. So on that note, just wanted to let you know on the link there, you can click that. I know before we had kind of a disclaimer, it was for California, Idaho, and Utah only. So just to be clear on that, Randy, you're going to open that up to everybody. If they do want to contact you, you're okay with that from any state?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And like I said, we can find somebody in any state that we can vouch for, I think.
And click on that link and it's going to ask for your name and phone number and email and best time to call. And it's not evasive in any way. It's just helping you be able to contact.
Yeah, that's all it is. And please don't hold it against me if it takes me a week to get back to you.
Okay. No, that's fine.
Great.
What makes a good prenup? How do you protect assets you acquired during the marriage? I think we answered that.
I think we did. Yeah, just remember, and if you go back on the PowerPoint here, it'll tell you how to do it. But I tell you, number one, get a good lawyer. That's probably the only way you're going to bulletproof it.
Not somebody that's been out of law school for a year.
I'll tell you something that's even worse. You can go online right now. I won't mention the name of the outfit. I think it ends with Zoom or starts with Zoom or something, but you can go on all these places and buy these fill in the blanks, or you can go to your brother-in-law and say, can I borrow yours? And you can, white it out and put your name. Don't do it. If you care enough to protect your assets, spend the money and do it the right way. Talk to a lawyer. I mean, I think forms are fine if you're selling a car.
Right.
But if if the assets mean enough to you or of enough value to you that you would do a prenup, do it the right way and spend the money.
I agree.
Yeah. Besides, if it goes south, you can always sue a lawyer. You didn't hear me say that.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you're a divorce attorney and your number one is, you know what, mediate this and avoid court.
Yeah. It's almost doesn't make sense. But what I've learned, I mean, I've been in the game long enough that I'm looking at it now that I'm trying to help people. I'm trying to give back. And if I know that you'll undoubtedly, this will be the hardest thing you will ever go through likely in your entire life. And you're vulnerable, it's hard, your whole world is collapsing.
It's gotta be emotional.
It's terrible emotional. And the thing is, if you could claw back that money, and I'm going to tell you, I'm happy. I always tell clients, I'm happy to take your money. Believe me, you won't even have to ask me twice. I'll take it. But honestly, you'll do better if you can save money doing some of these tips I gave you. And the good thing for me is then when somebody comes to you and says, who would I hire to divorce? You're going to say Skeen. He's good, he's expensive, he's a bulldog if you need him, but he cares and he'll try to save you money.
Well, okay, and so you say you're expensive, but in New York and California,
Oh, gosh.
you're not expensive.
Oh, man. I'm a piker. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's all in your locale.
Yeah.
And by the way, I charge different rates in Utah and Idaho than I do in California.
Okay. Okay, we got a lot more questions in 12 minutes. So,
Okay.
can I amend, this is from Joe, how can I amend an existing prenup to include a new husband in a second marriage while preserving something for the children in case of divorce, located in Florida?
Okay. I'm gathering you're already divorced and you have an existing prenup with wife number one. You can amend that, but you're going to have to get her on board.
Right.
And I wouldn't even call it a prenuptial agreement at that point. I would call it just an agreement. And the
Correct.
two of you sit down and decide what you're going to do. And then again, I'd really recommend you do a prenup for wife number two.
All right, I'm laughing at the next question. So after all the divorces you've seen, Randy, if a person's not married, do you just recommend not getting married?
Well, let me tell you, a lot of people like to walk around in bare feet on the beach, but would you like to walk on a hot highway with no shoes? It's the same thing. We're social animals, and I would never recommend not getting married for fear you might get divorced. I mean, I showed you the statistics, at least on a first marriage, they're in your favor. Not bad odds, really. But no, and I don't know if it's a tongue-in-cheek question or not. I take it as such. But, if you find the love of your life, marry him or her, and God bless you. But remember that marriage, isn't it, Dawn, the hardest thing you're ever going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to say sorry when you're really not. I hope my wife didn't hear that. You're going to find out that if you really love somebody, you'll do anything for them. And that would include keeping your marriage together.
So last month, July, was our 479th wedding anniversary.
479th.
And on Sunday, it'll be our 480.
480
months.
Oh, months.
We just never stopped counting months.
Well, you're just a baby. I got 44 and a half years.
So 40 years, and it was the best decision I've ever made. But here's the rule that we have, is that I have 2 days that I can be right.
Yeah. Oh,
my
yeah.
birthday and Father's Day, and other than that, it's just not my turn.
So I used to joke with my wife that she's always right. She was wrong one time, but then she discovered she really was right. So
all right,
I love you, Deb.
we got to keep going here. Can a person who has not made make full mental faculties file for divorce?
Boy, that's a really interesting question. And I've seen it. I personally have not had cases like that, but I've had cases where one of the parties was a lawyer, was horribly injured in a motorcycle accident, closed head injury, brain injury, and yes, they were able to divorce. So there's the capacity. But I think to be safe, what they would likely do is appoint a conservator and a guardian for that person to help with the divorce.
Okay. Farah is asking if a living girlfriend qualifies for, and I think we talked about that when we talked about
common law marriage.
Common law marriages. So hopefully we answered that.
Yeah, go down those bullet points.
Do you support shared parenting law and nationwide movement aims to make child custody 50-50 by default when parents have a clean background?
You know, my initial, if you'd asked me that question 30 years ago, I'd said absolutely not. I think that's the direction courts are moving. And I will tell you this too. If, I guess the short answer is yes, I do favor it now. I think if parents can get along well enough that they can share 50-50 custody with the children, and I'm going to tell you, that's going to be a lot of really hard work. But if you can do it, I'm all in favor of it. And I think the kids have a far better chance of not getting divorced themselves.
Okay. Christy is asking about hidden assets and the value of a forensic accountant.
I've used forensic accountants a lot. Well, I won't say a lot, but I'd say more than 25, 30 times. I like them. I use them to kind of find out what's there. But at the end of the day, remember, they're not private eyes. All they're going to look at is what you can give them. They're not going to dig very deeply to do that. But get a forensic accountant to work with your lawyer, and the lawyer will know what questions to ask and where to look.
Okay, I know a little bit about Christy's situation, and her husband has no assets, but he makes great money. But doesn't own a car in his name, doesn't have a bank account in his name, has nothing in his name. And she's been referred to forensic accountants, but she's a little concerned about the cost of that.
Yeah, they're expensive. The ones I've used actually charge more than I do. But you know, Christy, I think if you're not, the first thing I would do if I was representing you is I would get him under oath and tell me what he's doing, where the money's going, how he's living. And then I'd go up the chain. I'd go to his boss and take his deposition. And I would make it as uncomfortable as I could for him. I'd depose his friends. I'd depose, at some point, somebody will crack.
And Christy, if you don't have an accountant or an attorney that is willing to ask those questions,
get rid of him or her.
Honestly, because there's too much at stake when he's making money and Christy has no money and he's not paying child support because there's no money, and
judges aren't, you know, there's where it comes into that imputing income. You can hire experts, employment experts. We have a number of them here in Utah. And if you put on evidence, first of all, no judge is going to let somebody get away with that. And they'll impute income to him.
Good.
What does somebody that he does in the business make? $10,000 a month? They'll impute $10,000 a month. And I'm going to tell you, child support judgments are not just chargeable in bankruptcy. They are not, and there are no assets that are exempt.
Good.
So I've taken wallets, I've taken rings, I've taken watches, I've taken cars and trucks, and yeah.
Okay, Hope is asking, can I file in Nevada if I live in Washington State? Heard I can only file in Nevada, so it can be done in 30 days.
You have to be a resident of most states. Now, I did practice in Nevada for a year as a prosecutor, and didn't know that, but I know that Nevada's residency period is substantially shorter than most other states, and you can look it up online, and it'll be easy to tell. In Utah, you only have to be a resident 3 months. Nevada, I believe, but look it up online, maybe 30 days.
Okay. And we're getting some nice compliments. I appreciate that. JT, I place separate property in a joint revocable living trust after marriage. California resident. Will I lose half of it in a divorce?
Well, I would say there's a better chance than not, yes, if it's revocable. If it's irrevocable, it's probably safe. But if it's revocable, I think it's at risk.
Okay. And it may have to do more with when the asset was acquired. Was it community property?
True. Yes, that's
that would be more important because
yes,
the judge will retitle everything. If
it will, yeah. But if it was an asset that was acquired, I mean, it was sold in separate property and put into a revocable trust, I think it's pretty safe as long as the spouse isn't on the revocable trust somehow or has not deposited assets into that trust as well.
Correct. Yeah. All right. Tom, if I'm legally married for 2 years, how much would I owe if I never moved in together, but we don't have any joint assets or kids? Legally married for 2 years, but they never moved in together.
Yeah. Well, if he's talking about alimony or spousal support, probably none, because it's what we'd consider a short-term marriage. If they've never, I don't think it makes any difference legally whether you actually live together or not. There are a lot of marriages that are long distance. Someone lives in London and someone lives in New York, and they're treated about the same.
What about assets that are held jointly but held overseas?
Oh, okay. I represented a guy. He was a Fortune 500, president of a Fortune 500 company in San Diego. And in connection with his divorce, he had a small overseas account, right? So as he did not declare it in the divorce, I represented him in that. And then after that, the wife went to the US attorney and got him charged criminally because on the little box on your tax return, it says, do I maintain a offshore account? The account only had $11,000 in it, as I recall, and he only used it, you know, for pocket money when he traveled. Not only did he get prosecuted and convicted, did about 6 months in prison, but then the company that I won't name sued him to void out his golden parachute of about $7 million.
Ooh.
And I defended him in that. We wound up settling it, but he lost a pretty big chunk of that golden parachute. So offshore, careful, careful, careful.
Okay, good advice. All right, we don't have 5 minutes left. You know what, we're gonna go about 5 minutes over.
I'm good, I'm still
here.
here.
More of your questions. We appreciate you being on. For those of you that are on, we cannot make this any easier to talk to one of the best law firms in the nation. We've arranged for them to do 30-minute consults. Please take advantage of this. If you have questions about what we've talked about, we want to get into. I can't. I can't make it easier for them to get in touch with you.
Well, and we appreciate that.
So go to protectwealth.com/divorce. We're not going to get to all the questions, and so if you still have questions after the next 5 minutes, we're going to go as fast as we can. But set up an appointment with the attorneys, and they'll be able to answer the questions. Okay. Sheila, I'm not married. I've been working to increase my retirement for years. If I marry, will my husband be entitled to my retirement?
No. We have most states that I'm familiar with have laws. In Utah, it's called the Woodward principle, and it's a really simple mathematics. division. And basically what happens, if you worked, let's say 5 years at your job and then you got married for 10 years, it's really simple. Under Woodward, what would happen is the numerator would be how many months you were married, and the denominator would be how many months you were employed.
Okay.
And then if you do that math, it'll come out, and simply like that, if it was 5 and 10, you would get 1/3 right off the top would be King's X, that would be yours. And then you would get 1/2 of the remaining 2/3. And
So-
likewise for your husband or spouse.
So Sheila, rest easy. Keep
Yeah, you're
putting
in good
money in
shape.
your retirement accounts. From the moment that you get married, then it becomes a marital asset. Up until then, it's really not, is it?
That's correct.
Okay. My friend is not legally divorced as yet, but husband has married under Muslim rights. Is that legal, or what? How is that considered?
Well, I don't know really anything about Muslim rights, but I know that in most states it's a crime to have a bigamous marriage, but I don't know that the particular state would acknowledge a religious ceremony if there hasn't been a civil ceremony.
Great. Thanks for mentioning taxes paid from a joint account. Thank you for that. Kim is saying, hello, what happened during the marriage? One spouse was working very hard and saving and making most of the income by having business and investment in real estate. However, the other spouse has taken the easier way, not worked or saved much. Would it be fair to split the income 50-50 when one is doing most of the work?
Well, sadly, that's what the law is. And when you're talking about income, that may mean post-divorce, would there be alimony? And there may be or may not. It would just depend on a whole number of other factors. Hey, one other thing, if I can just mention
Sure.
this, I just thought of when you talked about paying taxes out of joint accounts and whatnot. Frequently over the years, if I see if somebody's going to get divorced, this is, I think, pretty darn good advice. If you have savings, pay off debt, because frequently the higher earning partner will get stuck with a larger part of the debt. So if you've
Including
got
back taxes?
back taxes are a different animal,
Okay.
because that's subject to whatever the government wants to do. But typically if you had a stay-at-home mom, dad's the sole breadwinner, they have a $40,000 in debt, and they've got a bank account of that. I recommend paying the debt off, because it's more than likely the working spouse is going to wind up paying all the debt anyway. So you might as well have mama help pay half.
There you go.
But I divert.
Okay.
Next question.
Good. Would judge be more likely to split the assets more toward the spouse that shows proof of being abused?
Most courts are what we call no fault. And that means you get divorced for a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason at all. However, there are generally exceptions for things like alimony, to where you can give evidence of fault, and that would be abuse. Okay. But again, that's something you'd probably want to check with your local state on.
So it wouldn't affect the assets
Probably
being
would not
split.
affect the property settlement, no, but it would affect spousal support.
That's a really, really good question.
It is.
Thank you. All right. One more question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up for the night.
Maybe Dawn will invite me back again, though.
Well, okay, there we go. So the foolproof way to asset protection is not get married. Spouse refused prenup. How do you make him? I don't know how to answer that.
Well, yeah, the first part of the question, yes, you're probably 100% safe with your stuff, as long as you don't have a common law marriage or a real, legal marriage. The second part, and what was that? As I was,
I don't know, let me go.
what if, okay, what if the anticipated spouse won't sign a prenuptial agreement?
Right.
You know, that's the whole problem with prenups, because a lot of people look at them as an indicia that you are going to get divorced. You're already planning for a divorce. And if you really love me, why would you have me sign this? If you really think this is the real thing forever, why are you going to make me do it?
It's not romantic. is it?
No, you
Yeah,
don't want to
yeah.
do that. You're not going to have a good date doing that. But the main reason you do it is to give some kind of certainty of control of what you have earned before the marriage. I mean, typically, I don't think anybody goes into a marriage saying, well, you know, we're going to give this a 3-year try and then split it up. But if you've worked hard and you've acquired assets before the marriage, and the other partner has too, why shouldn't they be protected?
Well, and here's where I see it, Randy. More important than anything is if somebody has kids that might get into a bad marriage, it might protect their inheritance.
It would that, absolutely it would. That's a great
And
point.
so, you know, there's spendthrift clauses you can put into the trust. There's things that you can do, not force your kids to have premarital, prenuptial agreements, but certainly encourage that. And
Yeah.
within your own trust, there can be a lot of clauses inside that. There's so
Yeah.
much that you can do, but before is in anticipation,
Yes.
not in the middle of.
No, you have to anticipate it and do it in advance.
Randy, cannot thank you enough. For the students that are here, thank you for being here. We appreciate you being on. Please take advantage of that. Again, we can't make it any easier for you to. We try to connect you with the best attorneys, the best tax people that we know in the nation. And Randy is somebody that I absolutely trust. Thank you for being on.
Well, thanks again, Don. I sure appreciate the opportunity.